Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. We still have people logging in, so we'll give them a minute or two to get settled and connected, and then we'll be underway. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining the Link Center today for this shared learning group focused on the topic of supporting the whole person. I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items while everyone gets settled and we get started. We do have live captioning and ASL interpreters with us today. The session will be recorded, and the recording and the transcript and all the materials will be available to attendees and anyone who registered. The PowerPoint and documents we review today will also be shared. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and to share it with your colleagues. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. Please use the chat function in Zoom to communicate with other attendees or the host during the webinar. You can use the chat by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen, and be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you make a comment. If you want to, you can change your display name by clicking on those three little dots next to your name and selecting rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately to the host and panelist, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Like I said, following the webinar, all material, including the transcript, the slides, and the recording of today's webinar, those will all be posted to the Link Center website and available for anyone to view. So at this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Stacy Nonamaker, who's going to start today's presentation. Stacy, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another shared learning group today, focusing on supporting the whole person, hosted by the Link Center, funded by the Administration for Community Living. So because we have so much good stuff planned for you today, if you want to know more about the Link Center, please take a moment to go up on our website. We're really striving to better support people with IDD, brain injury, other cognitive limitations, and co-occurring mental health conditions. So check us out and check back often. So about our time together today, today and tomorrow, we have 4 total shared learning groups for different audiences. Right now, we're tailoring this message and information for direct support professionals, and we'll also be gathering with clinical professionals later on today, individuals with lived experiences, and families tomorrow. The information really is the same, but we're tailoring it to each group. We've developed this content in partnership with other Link Center folks. That includes individuals with lived experience, researchers, people who work on policy issues, and you'll be hearing from a lot of those folks today. As Stephanie mentioned, we are recording and transcribing today's meeting. We'll be sending everything out to you, and we really encourage you to share all of this information so that together we can, again, better support individuals with co-occurring conditions. So I noticed that some of you are already jumping in and saying hello and thank you and hi. And for those of you that haven't, we'd love to know who's here. So if you want to take a moment and put your name and any group, association, or membership in the chat, that would be great. By way of agenda, we're really talking about supporting the whole person and what, as the Link Center, we've been thinking about, but really wanting to open up the chat, and later on during the group exercise, open up the mic to really hear from you all when we say supporting the whole person or holistic supports. What does that mean, especially for people who have co-occurring conditions, who may have needs that are across both or multiple, excuse me, systems. So we're going to talk about what we're thinking, but also wanting and things that we're digging up, but we also really want to hear from you. And that's our goals and hopefully our outcomes today. Hopefully we'll give you a lot of things to think about and some resources to do your work. We're also really looking as the Link Center to pull from you all what are some things that we should be elevating as the Link Center, whether it's through our conversations with partners, federal partners, or whether it's something that we could be putting on our website. And also we'll be listening out. There's a lot of our partners on today on what are some things that we could really take action for the Link Center. Where are the gaps? What do we need to be thinking more about? So we like to sort of lay the framework, and these next few slides, we like to emphasize the shared or the sharing in what we're doing with one another today. And these next few slides were developed by some of the folks who are on the steering committee who guide a lot of the work that we do at the Link Center, and they're individuals who have lived experience. So this meeting, we'll be talking about people's experience and being supported. And we acknowledge that some people have experienced trauma, and that makes it hard to recover and move forward. We want everybody that's joining us today to take care of yourself and do what's necessary for your own comfort and care. And we encourage you to be gentle with yourself and each other, because we know that sometimes the work that we're doing is hard. We celebrate that we are all individuals from different backgrounds. We celebrate that we have shared experiences that we can all learn from. We know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. And we listen and share with open minds and with kindness, and we do not judge or blame others for what they share. So we're trying to provide a safe space for us to share our thoughts around topic. There's many ways to do that. We'll provide an email at the end. Please feel free to engage in the chat or the Q&A. As Stephanie said, we have partners who are here who are ready to engage with you all. So as we're really thinking about, the topic of supporting the whole person, how important that is to for people with co-occurring conditions, we want to just start with you. As a supporter, feeling supported and having everything you need is different for everyone, right? And we want to know what are the things that are important to you to feel like you have everything you need to feel physically, mentally, and emotionally well. So I'm just going to stop for a moment and just open the chat and hear from you all. What are those things that are important to you? And then we'll continue on with the topic. Any thoughts you can share in the chat? What are the things that are important to you yourself? That's important to feel like you have everything you need to be physically, mentally, and emotionally well. Stability and patience, job and financial security, respect, flexibility, basic necessities, home, food, clothing, having your own space to recharge, regroup, decompress. Yeah, communication, positive feedback. These are all awesome. And really, thank you, because you're making the point that we want to make, that it is so unique to every individual in what is important to them to feel emotionally, physically, and mentally safe and well. And we have to take that into the work that we do. So I'm going to now pivot. Alicia is a steering committee member with the Link Center. And Alicia took a moment to tell us a little bit about what is important to her to feel physically, emotionally, and mentally well.
Hi, my name is Alicia. I'm a member of the Link Center National Steering Committee for Mental Health and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. I came here today to talk about how to support people from a holistic perspective by looking at the whole person and what allows them to thrive in everyday life. It's important to assess people's access to social determinants of health, especially around access to food that provides adequate nutrition and the barriers to obtain that nutrition. Often people with disabilities have increased risks with food insecurity. The average people don't really realize how it affects us, those of us with disabilities, and food controls like all of our essential functions. And if a person doesn't have adequate nutrition or the right supports for nutrition, it can cause like a decrease in executive functioning, communication challenges, poor health outcomes, and behavioral issues. It's important to recognize that these barriers affect everything from being able to purchase food or obtain supplemental nutrition supports to the preparation of food, even to being able to eat. And so people must examine these challenges around this issue when it comes to assessing the needs of people with disabilities. It's important to know that having unmet needs affect both physical and mental health, and the two interconnected also affect how people communicate and also how they respond to the services and supports given to them. And our direct support workforce crisis, that we've been in a direct support workforce crisis, and the whole direct support aspect has changed over the last few years, and we need to keep in mind some of the cultural differences and communication challenges that are present in the era of time. We need to be a cultural competent society, examining both provider and consumer relationships and working through language barriers and educational outcomes that challenge people, both people providing services and people receiving services. In my life, adequate nutrition has been key to helping me succeed. I feel better when I'm able to have my needs met around food, nutrition. It helps improve my health outcomes and quality of life. I have seen and experienced what my life has been like when my nutrition needs have been upheld and when they haven't been upheld. And I have a feeding disorder that requires some serious, careful structure around food. It requires me to have a meal plan and people to help assist me to prepare food. Because of my disability, I require a lot of hands-on assistance and people to prepare food. And so I've seen like what it's like with and without those supports. And when I'm not able to get adequate nutrition, I'm autistic and I have dysautonomia. And so when I'm not able to get this adequate nutrition, I have more aggressive meltdowns, more aggression. I have more challenges with my mental health. I also have more physical challenges like low blood pressure and even dysfunction of my autonomic nervous system. And so because I rely on people to support me to prepare food, there's challenges sometimes with being able to direct people. Sometimes it's due to like cultural issues. Someone might not know how to follow a recipe or something, and or I might not be able to direct them some barriers to my supports, and or there's just general overall barriers with preparation of food. And sometimes too, people might not know how to prepare a dish that I may need them to prepare it in a certain way. I think that that's definitely important. I've been really challenged by directing my providers. I've actually thought about even visual tools for this. It's a big deal for me because not everybody learns and processes information the same way too. And that's super, super important to know too, is that, just how have to look at it from both the provider view and the consumer view too, when you're looking at how people are able to get their needs met, but also what type of needs are being met. But I really believe that we have to advocate for cultural competency and more plain language in the training of direct support professionals and in service plans, and also too when special people have more complex needs with nutrition and everything. But people with disabilities, they must have access to adequate nutrition. And I believe that we have to make that part of the yearly assessment process too for services and supports. It's critical for helping people understand human behavior, decision making, and activities of daily living, because it helps see people as the whole person, so the team can understand their needs. And my waiver covers nutrition and behavioral supports, and it's been really important and everything. But despite having a nutrition plan in place, I've struggled a lot over the last few years to get my needs met because of the lack of assessments around nutrition specifically, and it's caused me to experience some challenges. And so it's really critical that providers and social workers, people that serve people with developmental disabilities, truly understand this nutrition piece, and because it also shows how a person directs their care and what supports need to be in place. So just because I sometimes too, because I speak so well, with my disability, people think that I can also direct my providers very, really well and everything. And so sometimes people don't see that they're, well, some of us might be good in one area, the difficulties, the challenges around food and the connections and stuff, they may not see that with your typical assessment. And so I think that having assessments around nutrition helps cut down on the stereotyping, and it really helps really look at the person from a whole body approach. And I believe that this should be available on all the different waivers, because it really assures people have their rights to make choices upheld as well. Thank you.
I appreciate Alicia's words and sharing her experience, and really making us think a little bit about nutrition and the role that plays in whole person supports. So we're going to go on, and we just wanted to emphasize the individuality of holistic supports. We're going to hear from Victoria, who is also another steering committee member, and she's going to talk about what's important to her.
Having someone that I can go to for anything I need is the most important thing that makes me feel supported. For me, that's my mom. Ever since I was little and I was in school, I had a hard time making friends. And my mom's helped me by setting up play dates, even though sometimes it didn't always feel like playing once my friends were there. I didn't really know at the time that I needed that kind of help, but I had someone who was helping me meet those needs I didn't even know I had. Throughout my education career, I always needed accommodations, but at the time I was a child, completely unable to self-advocate. So having someone there to help me, who knew me not just as a student, but what I was like at home, was very important. Because of my autism, I've also always had restricted eating patterns due to sensory issues, and that caused some health issues. My mom was really worried, so she tried to help me by not giving me the junk food I craved. But at the end of the day, that didn't work out as planned, and she was still supportive of me. She didn't shame me for not eating properly or make me feel bad about what I couldn't control. Later on, once I was a teenager and started having a lot of mental health issues, it was extremely important that my mother was supportive. In fact, I think the most terrifying moment of my life was once I turned 18 and I was essentially thrown to the wolves in the healthcare system. I was scared, I was alone, and I didn't have any support. The doctors wouldn't tell my parents anything because I was 18 and no longer a minor they were obligated to update my parents with. At the time, I had all the necessary medical help needed to support me, but that wasn't enough. It felt clinical and rigid because I knew these people weren't my friends, they were doctors. I needed warmth and comfort. I didn't want pills or drugs or therapy. I just wanted to be told that it's going to be okay, even if I wasn't sure it would. Sometimes there are things I can't open up to with the therapist for a variety of reasons. The most common is the fear of hospitalization, but there's also times where I don't really need therapeutic support. I just need someone to hear me and listen. I've had therapists, wraparound, respite, and other services help me in school, but at the end of the day, they would come and go, and it wasn't always the same person day to day. When someone came from the agency, they just send whoever they have, and having to reintroduce yourself over and over again is frustrating. When you have someone, a parent, it helps to know that there's always going to be someone for you. The reality is, you can't rely on paid services. You need someone who cares about you and isn't just paid to support you. I'm lucky to have other family to support me as well. I have my grandparents, my cousins, my aunts, because my parents can't be there for me 100% and also need to take a break. My parents have sometimes gone on vacation, and when they do, my grandparents come to stay with me. My grandma makes my favorite foods, and even though it doesn't sound like much, it's a lot. Having my extended family around is a safety net, because if something were to happen to my parents, I wouldn't end up alone. To wrap it up, I can have programs help me buy food, pay for rent, get access to therapy, but I need someone supportive to help me make those things a reality so that I'm safe and cared for.
Again, wow, I don't know, if there's any other words, but I
Yes, dear.
appreciate Victoria bringing up the points around the consistency of supports and the importance of informal supports as well. So again, I think between Alicia and Victoria, we really are seeing how individualized supports like holistic supports need to be. So just to give a framework before I turn it over, at the very core of holistic supports for people is really what the person wants and needs, and helping them as a direct support professional understand what their strengths are to build the skills that they need to live, work, and play where they want to live, work, and play, and to also inform or help them get the clinical supports that they need through treatments to help them self-manage or have someone help them manage their physical, emotional, and mental health needs. And all of this really needs to be done in the context of having healthy relationships, living in healthy environments, in the community, and by and large, most important, we'll talk about in just a moment, is ensuring that their social determinants of health and health-related social needs are there and they have them and they're being met. As a direct support professional, you may look at this and say, well, I only have so much influence or control, but in fact, you have influence over every one of these areas. You have influence over helping someone realize what they want or need, helping them build their skills that they need to live, work, and play, acknowledge and identify their strengths, to help them get the clinical supports that they may need, to inform the clinical supports because you may know that person best, and to help them create the healthy environments and healthy relationships in the community in which they live. And you may also have influence and control over ensuring that their social determinants of health and health-related social needs are met. So now I get to turn it over to Regina Rodriguez-Cisneros to talk a little bit more about the SCOH and the HRSNs. So she'll talk more about what that is. Regina?
Thank you so much, Stacy. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the segue into what I'm here today to share with you. So I'll move to the first slide of my presentation and talk to you about what are social determinants of health and what are health-related social needs. It's important that we respect the definition that has been designed by Healthy People 2020. So I will read verbatim this definition. Social determinants of health are the conditions and environments where individuals are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health, their functioning, quality of health, outcomes, and risks. Health-related needs refer to an individual's needs that might include affordable housing, healthy foods, or transportation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. So social determinants of health was designed and is monitored by Healthy People 2030. And they've divided social determinants of health into 5 key domains. Those are economic security, education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhood and built environment, social and community context. Next slide, please. Again, I really would like for us to understand what health-related social needs are. They are the social and economic needs that people have. So these needs can help an individual to feel healthy, help them to feel happy. In other words, impose a high quality of life. Some examples of these needs are having a stable place to live, the quality of the home that they live in, having enough food to eat and having access to quality foods, finding a job and/or going to school, feeling safe where they live and having a way to get around, paying for things like electricity and water. So these are very important social and economic needs that a person needs in order to feel that they are having a high quality of life. These lack of access to these health-related social needs can also have an adverse or a negative impact on a person's ability to feel healthy and to feel safe. Next slide, please. We heard both Alicia and Micah talk about what it means to introduce their culture, their perspectives, and their beliefs. But I think it's important that we define culture. Culture is how people behave. It's how people think. It includes ways that we speak, our languages, our beliefs, our customs. It covers our values. It also represents the roles that we play in society and in our communities. And it also defines how we act in different experiences related to our families, our work, our environments, our communities. And it describes for us the special things that groups do together to celebrate together, to express their traditions, or to honor their beliefs and their values. And it's important to note that culture can be passed down to future generations, and that cultural norms are developed in the different cultural settings that we participate in. And here is a culture wheel, and it's important. I didn't originally think I was going to talk about the culture wheel in depth, but I do want to highlight, because of one of the comments that I saw in the chat, that a culture wheel is a really important tool that can be utilized by direct service personnel to take notes and to get to know a person's beliefs, get to know some of their preferences related to food and drink that are either related to their disability and their nutrition that they need, and or that honor their values, their beliefs, their culture, their tradition. Completing a culture wheel for someone that you're providing support to in a person-centered focus really helps you to be able to take notes about what that person values. And if you've completed a culture wheel for the individuals that you're working with, it helps people not to have to reintroduce themselves over and over again to you. And it also helps you to relieve the burden of having to remember all the details about everyone that you're working with. We recognize that people have a lot of people that they're working with in restricted times, but establishing appreciation and respect for someone's culture and their beliefs really helps people to feel safe in your presence and to feel honored that you are honoring their whole self. Next slide, please. So take a moment and think about your own identities. Think about how you would fill out your culture will, and think about identities that are really important to you, because we all have identities and we all have different experiences that help us to decide how we want to define ourselves related to our identities. Think about the experiences that you have, how they affect you, and think about the ways that your identities contribute to what you believe, what you value, the things that are important to you, and the ways that you want to receive services, and the ways that you want to be supported. Next slide, please. Culture, when we embed culture and honor culture in person-centered practice, it helps us to understand what is important to a person. It helps us to understand that there are diverse perspectives. There's different ways to look at things, and there are just different ways to fulfill and honor a person's values and beliefs when we're providing person-centered perspectives. It helps us to understand cultural norms that are different from our own, and to look at cultural norms related to behavior and culture, as opposed to looking at cultural norms through our own internal biases. Things that we think and perceive to be standard may or may not be to someone that we're working with and or their families. Culture helps us understand what a person's values are, and helps us to understand why they are shaping their choices and shaping their perspective and their preferences related to supports. Ethics customs can determine how a person will interact with you. That means that if a person is from a different place than you are, they may speak differently, they may have cultural norms that are different. For example, they may or may not keep eye contact with you based on the way that their culture tells them it's appropriate to do. It may be important that they offer you food, offer you water, that they honor you as a welcoming guest in their environment. These are part of a person's ethnic cultural norms. But it's also important to recognize that when we feel unsure about different cultures, we have to recognize that that is an alert in us, that we should recognize our uncomfortableness is an invitation to learn. It's an invitation to understand and an invitation to learn what is important to the person that I'm here to support. I also wanted to mention that a person's intersectionality and subcultures that belong to them play a big role in their choices. And oftentimes, I don't think we talk enough about a person's subcultures. People choose what they want to do, choose the activities, choose the diverse groups that they participate in. And those subcultures play a significant role in how they make decisions about who will support them. And so I think that's important as direct service professionals, that we consider that, and that we consider that somebody's Bible study group, somebody's book club group, somebody's chess club, somebody's choir group, that all of these things are very intimate support groups and experiences that people are having in their lives. So it's important that we honor those and ensure that those are plotted on someone's culture wheel. Next slide, please. So I want to first thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you all. And then I'd like to turn it over to Micah Peace, who is a steering committee member. Micah, you can take the mic.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Regina. My name is Micah Peace-Warkia. I'm a researcher and educator and a multiply disabled self-advocate on the Link Center Steering Committee, and I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today. I'm going to talk about how we can begin to ground ourselves in our understanding of the work that we're doing and apply a lot of the concepts that Regina has talked about, that Alicia and Victoria introduced us to actually improve outcomes in people's lives and nurture wellness. And I'm also going to talk about some of the tools that we can use to do that with a thoughtful approach. Am I driving? I'm also a little bit nervous. Am I driving? Next slide, please. So, with this nuanced understanding of who people are and the situations that they're contextually living in, as Stacy and Regina have introduced us to, we can begin to apply our work in a much more person-centered way. This is one of those words that we hear so often in our work that we almost take it for granted as just what we do, and we don't really stop to think about what it means. But we would do really well, both by ourselves and by the people that we're serving, to get really, really clear, concrete, and intentional about what it is we mean when we say we're providing person-centered care. So this is the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services Department definition of person-centered care. And I think it's one of those kind of social work school definitions. It's really easy to turn your brain off to some of these words. But I'm going to pull on a few that I think are key. Person-centered care is defined as integrated healthcare services delivered in a setting and manner that is responsive to individuals and their goals, values, and preferences in a system that supports good provider-patient communication and empowers individuals receiving care and providers to make effective care plans together. And I want to point out that this is a way of providing care that is rooted in our values, that is rooted in humanistic ethics, and this idea that healthcare should be a lot more than what we can bill for or what you're eligible for based on the conditions coded for you. So if we're truly implementing person-centered care in a person's life, whether we're a clinician, whether we're a direct support professional, whether we're an administrative person helping someone get connected to resources, we need to do a couple of things. We need to be sure that we are looking at the whole picture and being holistic, that to be integrated means that all of these parts fit together, that there is connection between them. Because as Alicia and Victoria so clearly pointed out in their personal examples, so many facets of our life are indeed interconnected and directly related to and supportive of our overall well-being. And well-being and disability are not mutually exclusive. It is entirely possible for me as a medically complex, disabled, autistic person to live a happy, thriving life. I just require extra support and extra care to make that happen. And integration is vital. The setting and manner being responsive to individuals and our goals, values, and preferences are key. Victoria talked about at moments when her mental health was really struggling, the answer wasn't necessarily more medication or more therapy. It was a human connection. It was someone reminding her, you are going to get through this and I'm going to be there with you. And we have lots of tools at our disposal that we can lean on. That has everything to do with the human, as she said, guiding her through all of those litany of services that she named. It's great. And Alicia also said this in the chat, that our direct support providers and the other folks who are institutionally connected, so to speak, as the people with power, the people who know the resources and the ways to get them, you have a lot of control over our outcomes, over even the choices that we have the opportunity to make. And so being able to be responsive and proactive, as I saw, I believe Sandra said in the chat, rather than simply reacting to what's going on in a person's life, to really know someone and begin to make a plan that both supports their areas of vulnerability and need, but also actively supports and nurtures their wellness, is absolutely key. A few last things I want to touch on. This work takes place in a system. It is never something that you as a care coordinator or a direct support provider can do on your own. And that's okay. That's important. We have to get comfortable with navigating and especially communicating within that system alongside and on behalf of the people that we're supporting. And we have to nurture communication and collaboration early and often to ensure that that happens, because the plans of care, the supports that we offer and deliver, they should never be things that we have decided for someone, or well, here's your diagnosis, so this is what you need, or here is what the waiver says you can have, so this is what you're going to get. Each and every decision that makes up a plan of care should be made with the person, with their system of care, as far as is possible. And I know that many of us we live in systems that often challenge us in what we're able to do in a given moment, but don't worry, I'm gonna get to that. Next slide, please. I'm going to dig in a little bit more to some features of person-centered care. What does this look like? And as I've said, it's proactive. And it centers people's lived experience as well as their wellness, not only the things that needed support or the differences that warranted a diagnosis. And it also centers the inclusion and the voice of a person, however that voice may speak or may communicate, and ensuring that that person is connected within this system of supports that we're building and within the communities that they go back into when they leave our offices or our Zoom meeting spaces. So as I was talking about on our last slide, communication and collaboration between people with IDD, our providers, and our caregivers is vital, and the way that you engage with us upon meeting should early and often instill the importance of a person's own experience and person's own voice. Even if you're not sure how someone communicates, even if someone communicates in non-normative ways, you should speak directly to us. This is an absolutely vital prerequisite for fostering self-determination and choice. Even if we need support to make our choices, we need and this is a mental health need that I think is often really underrated and not talked about. We need a degree of choice in our lives and freedom as human beings. Autonomy is what this is about. And choice doesn't mean, do you want a green apple or a red apple? It means what Alicia was talking about when we acknowledge that someone might need specific nutrition support. So we don't ask them, do you want a green apple or a red apple? We ask them, do you want fruit with your lunch this week? Here's what we have, or here's what we can get from the store. What sounds good? And presenting those choices in a way that is going to be accessible and appropriate for a person, whether it's using images or a choice board, or whether it is, there's any number of ways of doing it, but the key is to be flexible and to be grounded and honest in the choices that we can offer people. We also need to be strengths-based. Person-centered care is not solely a treatment or a management plan, but it recognizes what is strong with a person, what lights a person up, what motivates a person, and it actively builds those in and recognizes that strength is an opportunity to mitigate vulnerability. That when we build on what is strong, we can nurture confidence, we can nurture self-esteem, we can build a sense of achievement and self-efficacy, and we can find roles in which a person feels valued, feels comfortable, and feels a part of their community, and that their voice and that their contribution does matter. And most importantly, perhaps, person-centered care is contextual and ecological. What this means is that it is incredibly sensitive to and conscious of in how it's carried out of things like the social determinants of health and our health-related social needs, that it understands the systems that we live in, and and that we understand that looking at a whole person doesn't mean looking at only the person. It means understanding me, not only as an autistic person, but as a member of a family, as a member of a community, as a member of a culture, and a religious background. It means understanding people as workers or people who would like to be workers. It means understanding us as people with history and quite likely trauma, and taking all of these factors and more into account as we plan out our services. And it also means, as others have noted, being culturally and linguistically competent, and I think more importantly, humble. Competence implies this idea that it's a place that we can arrive, that we can achieve completely, but I believe that it's a practice, because we have to be able to continually to decenter ourselves in these moments. We might be the person who has the institutional access to power, who has the years of experience providing these services, who has the fancy degree and all the knowledge that comes with it. However, we don't have the same lived experience that the people that we serve do. And I come from an organizing background and have been taught that those who are closest to a problem are also often the closest to a solution. So we have to be willing to be humble, to be curious about people's ways of living, ways of being, and what is important to them, because the solutions that we may offer, if we're too quick to offer them, if we are not sensitive enough to context and to the needs of the situation, then those solutions that we offer, they may not be the right one. Next slide, please. So in order to achieve positive health outcomes through a whole person care model, you have to deliver the right care in the right place at the right time. And care is another one of those words. Care is sometimes used to refer to treatment specifically, or the care that someone receives specifically in a medical context. But care is also a deeply human thing that is so much bigger and broader and can look a lot of different ways that aren't necessarily dictated by a diagnosis or waiver provision. Victoria's example, again, about not needing more therapy, but in just that human connection, the comfort of familiar food that her grandparents cooked, or in the way that she ends her statement with saying, that human connection lets me know that I am safe and cared for. We often approach people with disabilities with this idea that the whole thing is just to keep people safe and mitigate risk. But we need to know that we're cared for, that someone will have our back. And so it can be showing up in a time of crisis just to say, I'm here with you and you're going to be okay. It can be really looking deeply at a person's social determinants of health and really helping them solve their problem of food insecurity, and get connected to places where they can find safe and nutritious food. It can look like lining up a treatment that's been needed, but someone's had trouble accessing. It can also look like advocating when you notice gaps or barriers in the system, or when you notice that someone hasn't been given the opportunity to find a functional means of communication. It can look like turning to your coworker in the break room and saying, we have to do something about these regulations. We have to, or finding or building support networks for DSPs to reduce turnover and job fatigue. All of these ways, all of these actions demonstrate care. And so we have to become very sensitive to what is needed in a given moment and get really good at that kind of responsiveness, I'll say. Next slide. So the biopsychosocial framework might be something that lots of you have heard before, but today I'm going to talk about putting the social back in biopsychosocial. So next slide, please. So this is yet another one of those concepts that has almost become, I think, like wallpaper in our field. We say it a lot, but we don't quite think about it as deeply as we should. We're very good in some cases, I would argue, not as good as we should be at some of the biopsycho, although many people with disabilities often have unmet medical needs. Talk about that more in a moment. But first, I want to preface this section with saying that this is a place where I'm going to get into some things that are a bit sensitive. They can be a bit hard to hear. There are some realities about, some social realities about being a disabled person in the world that can be pretty difficult. And so if any of this might be triggering for you, please take a moment and take a break. It's okay. But to return to our discussion here. We still live in a situation where the medical model of disability is pretty dominant. Some medical professionals are still taught that disability is primarily a health outcome, and it's a bad one. And I don't think that that is an entirely appropriate or fair way to approach something that is, in fact, a natural part of the human experience. Anybody that has the good fortune to live long enough is going to see themselves beginning to lose some abilities and probably having gained some abilities along the way as well. But this overarching medical model promotes an illusion called diagnostic overshadowing. And what that means is that people with disabilities, particularly intellectual and developmental disabilities, often have our mental health challenges or struggles in other areas of life misunderstood as being purely the result of our disability. If I'm having a bad day because I'm autistic, it's not because I don't have enough good food to eat or because my house is too messy and I don't have enough support to get it cleaned until Friday. It's just because I'm autistic and I have behaviors. This isn't a fair judgment to make of anybody. And the impact of it is that social context often go ignored and undersupported. But the reality for every human being, regardless of our diagnosis or disability status, is that when the circumstances that we're living in undermine our conditions for wellness, that is those social determinants and health-related social needs that we learned about, if those are undermined, we're going to struggle. That's human nature. And we need to use the medical models and the social model of disability, that is understanding that we have constructed our world in certain ways that is disabling. Things like stairs, and the fact that we still will require people to use the freight elevator in buildings like hotels and call that access. You know, you might be able to get up to your floor, but there's a psychological effect to being made to go in through the back with the trash. We need to recognize that, yes, someone can have very complex nutritional needs and yet still need to have a say in how those needs are met. That someone can have all the support that they need on paper and still need intention and support to help guide and direct those services for them to be applied successfully. This is the difference between setting someone up for failure or beginning to actually build what it takes for someone to thrive. And the ways that we have constructed some of our systems have led to a few different social experiences that are unfortunately common, particularly to people with IDD, but across disability and marginalized groups as a whole. Some of these include isolation and exclusion, that freight elevator that I'm talking about, or in my high school, the special education department had its own hallway, its own little wing that often felt like they would much rather people with disabilities be kept away from everyone else, that we should have to feel shame to go down that hallway. and that we shouldn't interact with our peers. High rates of trauma from these experiences that I'm describing, from bullying, from neglect, from continually having to introduce yourself only to watch that person leave you. Barriers to communication, information, and choice. Things like, I remember growing up in the psychiatric system and being talked about in front of me without me constantly, leaving only knowing that I was going to have new instructions to follow. And that if they talked to me, it was only going to be for a few minutes to make sure it's not making me too tired or something. I didn't have access to a lot of information about my care until I was on my own, which, just like Victoria describes, makes turning 18 and navigating your own healthcare a very scary and overwhelming experience. And I think it's really important to note that we face so many systemic barriers to our healthcare that people with disabilities have been declared a health disparity group by the World Health Organization. And that often things like aggression, just as Alicia said, belie unmet health needs, whether it's pain, whether it is a nutritional need, or a serious medical problem like an obstruction that could be life-threatening. And so these are really important to consider when you are meeting with folks. You are very likely meeting with a person who has experienced trauma, likely, possibly significant trauma. And that has to be considered in how we carry out not only the plans that we provide people with, but our interactions with them. Next slide, please. So we have to navigate a lot of stairs and silos as people with disabilities. I use this phrase stairs to refer to ableism and paternalism. Ableism is this idea, I alluded to it a little bit with talking about the medical model, but it's this idea basically that non-disabled people are better and have happier lives than disabled people. And it values people based on what you can do, or and judges people based on what you can't. Paternalism is this idea that as a non-disabled person, you somehow have a right or even a responsibility to do for a person with disabilities rather than doing with us, rather than sharing some of the power and privilege that you have. It's important to understand that people with disabilities do have a voice, but others often struggle to hear us. And I want to be very clear that I'm including people who use non-normative means of communication, people who use AAC. I'm a part-time AAC user myself. And I have seen many, many times people be very impatient, very dismissive to me or to my friends who use things like letterboards or other devices. People will leave you out of a conversation. People won't give you long enough to respond. People will assume out of hand that because you're not speaking, you don't have anything going on upstairs, or you don't want to be a part of this conversation. And it is disrespectful, it's demoralizing, and anybody who can, and the reality is that many people with disabilities are deprived of communication, whether they're deaf and don't have access to ASL because no one in their family does, whether they have yet to have the opportunity to try a device, that the communication is key, and anybody that can direct their gaze, that can smile or frown at you, that can bit or manipulate objects if they're unhappy, that can leave a room if they're not feeling it, these are people that can communicate with you. It's down to you to learn to listen. We are, all of us, very familiar with the siloed nature of our service system, and a lot of those dynamics that really don't promote giving us the time that we need with an individual to really get to know someone, that make getting connected to services hard, or high rates of turnover. Many of us are exhausted and burnt out but you need to understand that this also trickles down and can be felt in the lives of those that you're serving, many of whom are also exhausted and burnt out. And we have a lot of work to do around the separation and isolation that people navigating, particularly the developmental disability and mental health service systems, experience as a result of being part of those systems. And the reality is that we can't get our needs met without engaging with some of these systems. And other isolating experiences, including Alicia spoke about poverty and food insecurity that are often institutionalized for decisions that are made for us. Sometimes to depend on these services is to be relegated to food insecurity and to poverty. This is wrong and something that needs advocacy. As well as a lack of access to technology, community, or opportunities to build skills. People often presume that people with disabilities are incompetent, and so we're not given opportunities to try, which of course results in a lack of skills. And often when we are invited into these processes or to be part of collaborating in our planning, we're often tokenized, spoken over by the same people who claim to be our advocates. Sometimes in the name of just getting the job done faster. We have to remember to slow down, be very human with ourselves and with each other as we approach this work. And I want to offer a way that we can do that with my next slide. We can begin to shift away from a deficit-based model and toward supporting well-being for people. I want to acknowledge that, of course, we're always going to have our areas where we need supports, waiver-based supports, where we need medical intervention, but none of these things are mutually exclusive with well-being. Rather, most of these things we might see better outcomes if they're coupled with supportive factors like PERMA. This comes from positive psychology and Martin Seligman, who is the father of the field, who found through long-term research that there are 5, this is part of kind of a unified theory of well-being, if you will. These are kind of the 5 factors that across cultures, across experiences, that human beings need to have to live well. And he later added, more fairly recently, a plus or a V, which is sometimes understood as vitality, that covers all of those social determinants of health and things that we've discussed. A safe place to call home, people around you, healthy food to eat and movement for your body. These support PERMA, which are positive emotions, and not just being happy, but having fun, having the opportunity to laugh and feel good about yourself in a day. Things that engage us, things like a job or a faith community or volunteering, or even just our special interest or favorite activity. I want you to notice R because it's in the middle. Our relationships are the center of everything for us as humans. And having positive relationships, and really importantly, unpaid, natural relationships where we're valued for who we are, just like Victoria spoke about. Things that provide meaning in our life and a connection to something bigger than ourselves, like being a member of a faith community or volunteering, and a sense of accomplishment. This doesn't have to be accomplishment as everybody would define it, but just this idea that I did something well today, even if it's just getting dressed. And these things are opportunities that we can look for in people's lives to build more positive, human-based supports instead of taking that purely clinical, mechanical kind of approach to supporting people with disabilities. Next slide. And now I'm going to talk about a few tools, but I bet you're like, wait a minute, this feels like kind of a hard left turn. But technology is part of our daily life now. And I mean, most of us don't go a day without using electronic technology. We also have discussed some major gaps that people face, including a workforce shortage, the failure to include or to properly accommodate people who can't rely on language to communicate, and what kind of resources are available, especially things like transportation and CLS funding. Things like this are often prohibitively limited in our systems, while human needs are not limited. Technology continues to advance in a lot of different areas that can support effective clinical service delivery for people with IDD. But we have to remember, technology is like the car that you use to take a journey. It's not the journey itself, it's just how you get there. And you might take a trip in a car, a truck, a bus, or a train, but none of those things the journey themselves. It's a means to an end, which is why technology by itself is no replacement for properly addressing someone's social determinants of health. You cannot telehealth your way out of a lot of the problems that we're in, but it can help. But we have to situate our use of technology in proper context for a person. That's why we've been grounding in what it means to really be person-centered today. So with that in mind, let's take a quick look at a few options for using technology to complement a person's system of support. Next slide. The first one is telehealth. And telehealth is this all-encompassing word for a lot of ways of getting services. But remember, it's not the service. And like any service itself, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach to this. We're still learning about what makes telehealth work effectively for people with disabilities, but I've been a part of a large study that has found a few things. The first is that there are many parts to consider when we're planning telehealth engagement for someone to ensure that that use of telehealth is actually accessible, engaging, and therapeutic for people with IDD. There's a whole lot that we have to consider to make sure that we are having a positive impact because so many things, telehealth included, have been made without people with disabilities in mind. So professionals should support people with IDD and our caregivers in gaining access to the technology that is appropriate for us. Both the resources we may need in terms of how are we going to pay the internet bill if we've never had that before? How are my aging parents going to learn to navigate this web-based thing if they've never done it before? You have to help people gain not only the technology, but the skills and the resources that they need. Yes, Alicia, funding for iPads and tablets should be a consideration. Not making people self-fund what is often very expensive technology. And we need to accept that certain parts of services still need an in-person based approach and ongoing engagement between all parties for it to be effective. And focus on the relationship is especially vital when you can't be together in person. And naturally, we want to be providing, we want the folks who are providing telehealth to be skilled at the service itself. We want good doctors. We want great therapists at providing therapy. But being really skilled in your field, remember, that's not enough. Providers should also be knowledgeable in helping people prepare for telehealth. Do you need to practice something? Do you need help using your microphone or your webcam? Do you need to practice so that we can troubleshoot in case anything goes wrong? There's a lot that providers can do. And those kind of skills can play a big role in one's comfort and success with using telehealth and using technology in general. Next slide, please. Here's a quick video that I'm going to offer to folks. We don't have time to play it right now because in my nervousness, I've talked too much. But I encourage you to check it out. This video shares the several main skills that we have found that providers should draw on to prepare people to use telehealth like services. And it was a part of our large PCORI funded study. But I also want to talk really quickly on the next slide about apps. They're everywhere. Everybody's got, one of these things. And there is no shortage of apps, and there's even more every single day, which can make and that like degree of choice can make it hard to tell what's really going to be effective or what is helpful. The FASTER guide also offers a framework and a link for making that decision more quickly. But I think that the most important thing to understand, as we've discussed, is that everybody is different and accessibility is key. And any app that we suggest or begin to apply should be grounded in person-centered planning and should be indicated by wants, needs, and values in a person's life already. These are things that can complement other supports, but they're generally not a replacement. And they might be one of those things where, just as Alicia said, we might implement it, but we might still need help to actually successfully apply it. And that's okay. But there are things like telehealth by Simple Practice, Talkspace to help people access therapy in places where it might be hard to find, Happify, where you can do CBT-based exercises on your own time. And these two on the last are ones that I use almost every day. Goblin Tools helps me break down household tasks into manageable steps so that I can actually do things independently. And AAC Bestie helps me talk when I can't. So not every app that's going to be supportive for a person is directly a mental health app, for example. And I also wanted to bring up Black Dog Institute. This is a really great app and website that I highly recommend. It's out of Australia, but a lot of the mental health apps that we have aren't designed for people with disabilities. Black Dog and Healthy Mind is. It's plain language. It's mental health support made for people with IDD that can be self-guided and self-directed. And that makes the difference. So next slide, I'm going to pass it over to Stacy to say a little more about technology.
Thanks so much, Micah. And hopefully, I know that Micah gave us a ton to think about when we're thinking about person-centered, holistic supports. And just to really put a bow on what Micah said around technology, it's happening, it's out there, and we need to think out of our barrier box. No transportation, demographics, workforce issues, and technology is one way to think about that. We just wanted to provide you with an example that Ohio is really engaging around technology. And I know this timeline only goes up to 2021, but in the last 10 years, there have been a lot of projects in Ohio around telepsychiatry, tech ambassadors that they have, also looking at telemedicine. So when you get your hands on this PowerPoint, take a look and see some of the things that Ohio is doing and think about it as an example and a resource as well. The last thing that I do want to say, and again, I think Micah did such a wonderful job in talking about how important being person-centeredness and putting the social back in biopsychosocial, but that really for people who are in service, case management is such a critical service for people. And really the role of a case manager is to assess, develop service plans, make sure they're being implemented and implemented in a way that's important for somebody. And just to reinforce that, in the regs and in the CMS technical guidance, on the DD side of the service system, really case managers are required to include services that are funded from services other than the waivers. So these are services through public programs and those informal supports that Victoria talked about. So really bringing home that idea and reinforcing what Micah said, that the service plan should provide a complete picture of how someone's needs are met. So now this is the part that I get to turn it over to our partners in this work, Maria and Max, who will facilitate a group exercise to really get you all thinking more about what we've already talked about, and really applying that, and we get to sit back and listen to how you're thinking about this topic as well. So I'll turn it over to Maria and Max.
Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that.
Hello. Alrighty, so what we are going to do is I'm gonna read this scenario, and then what your job is going to do is you're going to just write down like some things that you need to consider when you're supporting this individual, and like what things you prioritize when supporting this individual. So listen very carefully, and then I will have you do that. And pretty much the way it's going to work is you're going to have your what you think of shared in chat. And as a result, I will, read them to the best of my ability, even depending on the traffic. But, I will definitely address what you come up with. So on that note, here we go. So Chet lives with his parents. He was just let go from his job at the hardware store because he missed a lot of shifts due to his anxiety. Chet sometimes has trouble leaving the house, especially when his parents are not home to help him get off the bad thoughts he has. He says he feels better when he gets a good night's sleep, but they live in the city and it can be very loud at night. Chet's parents have been looking for work because their company shut down and they have no income. They also lost their health insurance. Chet really wants a girlfriend and to live in his own place one day, but doesn't feel like that will ever happen. As Chet's supporter, what are some things that you need to consider when you are supporting him? What things can you prioritize when supporting him?
Yes, and if you would place some responses to those in the chat, thinking about all the things that have been discussed so far, what sort of supports come to mind? Max, I see job coaching.
Job coaching needed. Consider his insecurities, their financial needs.
Great answers.
Yep. Respite looks at ways to assist Chet to work through his anxiety. Consider medication for the anxiety. Being aware of the amount of loss that he and his family is experiencing. The question is he getting state DD or IDD services, counseling, health and well-being as he has trouble sleeping, bedtime routine, sound medicine.
Oh, sound machine, great suggestion.
Looking for work from home job, get them help on getting back on their health insurance, helping with health insurance, Medicaid.
You guys are touching on so many things. And one of the things that occurs to me based on something that Micah spent a good bit of time talking about is, what is Chet interested in? How does he prioritize his needs?
All right, I got more coming in fast.
Mm-hmm.
Assessing unmet needs, consider job coach, assessment for housing and other social determinants of health, assessment options of underlying cause of lack of sleep or sound machine. Ask the person what they want.
There it is. Thanks, Alicia.
Financial resource for him and his family.
Definitely. And what should we do about his interest in some social connection? Any
More coming
suggestions
in.
there?
Connected to emergency food supports like pantries, etc. Peer supports.
Nice.
Look for resources. Connect him to 211.
Really good suggestions. And as direct support professionals, trying to fit all those pieces together in some whole way with a good plan.
Help him look for connections in his community. What hobbies, activities, or interests does Chet have? What kinds of groups in his community have opportunities to connect him for things like recreation as well as peer support? Exploring recreation options might help with sleeping. Depending on what state services he might be getting, there could be services like community engagement provider might help.
Great suggestions.
Oh my goodness. There's a
I
lot.
Yeah, I have an idea of, you guys have some resources in mind already that you use, which is a really nice segue, don't you think, Max, to probably what Jean wants to touch on before we close out.
Can I quickly read the rest of these?
Sure, if we have time.
I think I can get through them. Depending on what the state, I think I already said that one. Ask him about what like to do to see if community options available, or maybe see if he wants to create something new. Engage him to get out, join a club, participate in hobbies, community outings, and social groups. I would prioritize those things that kind of provide immediate oxygen, like focusing on making sure they can eat, sleep, and have some breaks from the stress, as well as trying to learn and build on Chet's interests and strengths. Life skills coaching so he is successfully independent when he moves out and is on his own. There you go. Oh God.
Right.
Thank you so
Great.
much for all the suggestions and resources. Jean, over to
Definitely.
you. All right. Over to you, Jean.
Alrighty, great. Thank you, Max and Maria and Stacy and everyone. Micah, what an amazing day. It's just been so exciting to learn and hear all this important information. So be sure to continue to add to the chat. We want to, be really clear about what your go-to resources are, training, websites, and just anything that will help us develop more robust materials and, just be a better and better resource. Again, thanks so much for this great discussion. So here is the schedule of the past and now upcoming shared learning groups. And you can find recordings and transcripts and attached handouts for all of these on the Link Center website. So the next topic that we will be navigating will be risky situations, navigating risky situations in October. And as you know, you can visit the Link Center anytime. The address is right here. You can also email us at the Link Center if you have any questions or suggestions, anything at all. We are trying to just be the greatest resource we can possibly be, and your input is critical to that. We have a quick evaluation that is super important for us, so please complete it. As you see here on the screen, there's a QR code and you can scan it with your phone. We'll also put the link in the chat in case that's easier for you. And it will pop up when we close today and be sent to everyone in an email as well. We are super dedicated to getting your feedback, again, to help us improve and just make more robust and meaningful everything that we do. Thank you again so much for participating today. A very special thank you to Alicia, Victoria, Micah, all of whom are members of our Link Center Steering Committee, for the time, your very valuable and generous time, and all of the input and contributions you made to making these and all the shared learning groups so fantastic. And thank you also, of course, to the ACL and to all of our partners who are contributing. Thanks all of you so very much. And that's all we have for today. And we all wish you a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again.